So all know how the Western governments like to treat whistleblowers of war crimes and political corruption. We only have to think of Chelsea Manning being one of those who was persecuted, thrown in prison for 7 years, then released, then thrown back again, and they tried to coerce her to get information about Julian Assange, to try and roll over on Julian Assange, and she refused to do that. She's a real hero. And whistleblowers are very selfless in that they risk their own freedom to reveal information that the public needs to know. The current administration, the Biden administration, is no different from the Trump administration, is no different from any other administration in the US. They don't care. They actually give medals to war criminals. They sing their praises, but they vilify and persecute relentlessly anybody who is a whistleblower, because the crimes of the oligarchy, the crimes of the military-industrial complex, they want them to go unnoticed so they can continue on their capitalist aims around the world, pillaging and destroying countries for their resources and to gain hegemony in that region. So Daniel Hale is somebody I mentioned about a year and a half ago, and he is by the way, Julian Assange was the publisher. He wasn't the whistleblower, but he assisted. He was the one that Chelsea Manning leaked that information of the collateral murder video and many, many thousands of files that were all important to expose the war crimes of the US empire and political corruption. And Daniel Hale, as I mentioned about a year and a half ago, I wasn't really sure what was going on with him, but recently, yesterday or the day before, he was sentenced to, I think it was either 4 or 5 years in prison for having the courage to release information about the appalling drone program that, Obama used that drone program, and it ended up being revealed that it's been a program that's been used even against US citizens. So this has been going on now for a number of years, using drones to assassinate people. And most of the people that are assassinated are women and children, and men, women, and children, basically civilians. About 85% of people that are killed are not the targets of those drone assassinations. They are families and just innocent bystanders, and including non-human animals. So this is what's been going on for years. This has been used as one of the many methods of just basically bombing people from helicopters and from AC-130, the Angel of Death, that kind of thing, using Hellfire missiles to basically reduce the number of fatalities also of soldiers, so that they don't bring attention to these appalling endless wars. They don't want the public to start calling out about any fatalities of soldiers. They don't want that to be known. That's why the Bush administration managed to forbid any photos of caskets with flags on top of those caskets. And so they just spend a lot of time aerial bombing of civilians and villages and all of that in Afghanistan and Iraq, so that they don't have this any sort of noticeable death toll of American soldiers. Of course, I'm getting off the track here, but I'm going to get back to Daniel Hale, this whistleblower hero. But you've probably heard that 30,000+ soldiers have killed themselves since 9/11 began, and about 7,000 have been killed in combat and associated incidents. So, so there's a level of tremendous guilt and PTSD from soldiers, from military that go in and do unspeakable things to civilians and children included, and torturing and so forth, rape and all of that, and then come back home as veterans and are treated appallingly by the government, and a lot of them end up homeless and on substance abuse and terrible depression, and many kill themselves, as in that 30,000 statistic from the beginning of the 9/11 attacks.
Honor, the truest truism that I've come to understand about the nature of war is that war is trauma. I believe that any person either called upon or coerced to participate in war against their fellow man is promised to be exposed to some form of trauma. In that way, no soldier blessed to have returned home from war does so uninjured. The crux of PTSD is that it's a moral conundrum that afflicts invisible wounds on the psyche of a person, made to burden the weight of experience resilience after surviving a traumatic event. How PTSD manifests depends on the circumstances of the event. So how is the drone operator to process this? The victorious rifleman, unquestioningly remorseful, at least keeps his honor intact by having faced off against his enemy on the battlefield. The determined fighter pilot has the luxury of not having to witness the gruesome aftermath. But what possibly could I have done to cope with the undeniable cruelties that I perpetuated? My conscience, once held at bay, came roaring back to life. At first, I tried to ignore it, wishing instead that someone, better placed than I, should come along to take this cup from me. But this, too, was folly. Left to decide whether to act, I only could do that which I ought to do before God and my own conscience. The answer came to me that to stop the cycle of violence, I ought to sacrifice my own life and not that of another person. So I contacted an investigative reporter with whom I had had an established prior relationship and told him I had something the American people needed to know.
What we've published is an extensive look into how this program has operated historically, but specifically under President Obama. One of the most significant findings of this, and my colleague Cora Currier really dug deep into this, is we published for the first time the kill chain, what the bureaucracy of assassination looks like. And what you see is that all of these officials, including people like the Treasury Secretary, are part of signing off on all of this, where they have these secret meetings and they discuss who's going to live and die around the world. And at the end of that process, it is the President of the United States who signs what amounts to a death warrant for whoever they've decided should die based on what amounts to a parallel secret judicial system in the United States that is not really subjected to any kind of judicial review, where the president acts sort of as emperor, issues an edict that you die. And what we show, and this is the first time that there's documentary evidence of this, is that the president gives the military a 60-day window to hunt down and kill these individuals. Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch pointed out today, if the standard is that the people who are being targeted for assassination is that they represent an imminent threat, which is what the president says the U.S. policy is, then why do they have 60 days to do it? Why don't they need to do it now if it's imminent? Well, that's because they've redefined the term imminent to be so vague as to not even resemble its actual commonly understood definition.
And Daniel Hale, the whistleblower who brought the attention of the drone assassination program to Jeremy Scahill from The Intercept, and he released this information to the public. He suffers from terrible depression because he was, from 2009 to 2013, he was involved in the drone assassination program, helping to target particular individuals, but ended up, of course, they'd end up killing entire groups. I'm not sure how many people Daniel Hale assisted in killing with these drone assassinations in Afghanistan, but he describes some of them, and of course he's absolutely appalled at what he was participating in, and he's got terrible depression, and he I think he sees that if he goes to prison, that it is he says his life wasn't worth more than any of those people that he assisted with these drone assassinations. But the thing is that he's actually, he is a hero in that he had the courage to speak out against this appalling extrajudicial killings of civilians mostly. And even if they were insurgents in quotes, or what the US government called terrorists, or whatever they decided, without trial they were going to kill, it doesn't matter. It's just an appalling, it's an appalling fascistic thing that the U.S. empire engages in every single day, all over the world, all over the Middle East, and Mr. Hale had the courage to speak out about this particular drone assassination program. Of course, it keeps on going. They're not going to stop it. And during the Trump administration, Trump actually decided he wasn't even going to count and collect data on the amount of people that were killed with those drone assassination, within that drone assassination program. So anyway, Daniel Hale, he worked with the NSA, and he worked with, in this drone assassination program from 2009 to 2013. And then he released information about what he saw during that time. And then that was released to the public via Jeremy Scahill in The Intercept. So I'm going to share with you a little clip from Democracy Now! And please note, I'm not endorsing Democracy Now! They've moved to a sort of pushing imperialist talking points a lot of the time. So, but this was a clip from 2018. It shows Daniel Hale talking, and then I wanted to also, if I'm going to share excerpts of Daniel Hale's letter that he wrote to the judge who sentenced him a couple of days ago. And I think it's important to hear. It's done in his own hand, and I think it's important for us to hear what he had to say, particularly if you're not familiar with what US empire gets up to every single day in our names, even though we don't even know what they're doing, which is the absolute intention. And that's why when whistleblowers come forth like Daniel Hale or Chelsea Manning, that's why they're persecuted so badly. And people like Julian Assange, who published Chelsea Manning's revelations, he's been absolutely hounded and persecuted, and may end up killing him because they want to make an absolute example. These are examples like, as one particular journalist said, it's the equivalent of a severed head on a pike outside the city gates. These persecutions of whistleblowers and publishers like Julian Assange are intended to be a warning to anybody thinking about revealing any sort of corruption, any sort of war crimes about the state, about US empire. This is the letter that Daniel Hale, the whistleblower, wrote to the judge prior to sentencing. Unfortunately, the motivations of a person who is on trial in this case are not taken into consideration by the judge before sentencing. So one can only hope that maybe he was influenced somewhat, or maybe he didn't even read this letter. Quote, "We now kill people," and by the way, and I'm going to just read some excerpts. I'm not going to read the whole letter. I probably will maybe do a complete, just one video reading the letter, because I think it's very important that people hear about this whistleblower's experience and why he did what he did, and the more the public become educated about US empire's war crimes around the globe, the better. It'll help hopefully bring these endless wars to an end. So I'll probably do a complete video of this letter on another occasion. Quote, "We now kill people without ever seeing them. Now you push a button thousands of miles away. Since it's all done by remote control, there's no remorse. And then we come home in triumph," end quote. That's by US Navy Admiral Jean LaRocque, speaking to a reporter in 1995. "Dear Judge O'Grady, it is not a secret that I struggle to live with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Both stem from my childhood experience growing up in a rural mountain community and were compounded by exposure to combat during military service. Depression is constant. Through stress, particularly stress caused by war, can manifest itself at different times and in different ways. The telltale signs of a person afflicted by PTSD and depression can often be outwardly observed and are practically universally recognizable. Hard lines about the face and jaw. Eyes once bright and wide, now deep-set and fearful. And an inexplicably sudden loss of interest in things that used to spark joy. These are the noticeable changes in my demeanor, marked by those who knew me before and after military service. To say that the period of my life spent serving in the United States Air Force had an impression on me would be an understatement. It's more accurate to say that it irreversibly transformed my identity as an American, having forever altered the threads of my life story, weaved into the fabric of our nation's history. To better appreciate the significance of how this came to pass, I would like to explain my experience deployed to Afghanistan as it was in 2012, and how it is I came to violate the Espionage Act as a result. In my capacity as a signals intelligence analyst stationed in Bagram Air Base, I was made to track down the geographic location of handset cell phone devices believed to be in the possession of so-called enemy combatants. To accomplish this mission required access to a complex chain of globe-spanning satellites capable of maintaining an unbroken connection with remotely piloted aircraft, commonly referred to as drones. Once a steady connection is made and a targeted cell phone device is acquired, an imagery analysis in the US, in coordination with a drone pilot and camera operator, would take over using information I provided to surveil everything that occurred within the drone's field of vision. This was done most often to document the day-to-day lives of suspected militants. Sometimes under the right conditions, an attempt at capture would be made. Other times, a decision to strike and kill them where they stood would be weighed. The first time that I witnessed a drone strike came within days of my arrival to Afghanistan. Early that morning before dawn, a group of men had gathered together in the mountain ranges of Patika province around a campfire, carrying weapons and brewing tea. That they carried weapons with them would not have been considered out of the ordinary in the place I grew up, much less within the virtually lawless tribal territories outside of, of the Afghan authorities. Except that among them was a suspected member of the Taliban, given away by the targeted cell phone device in his pocket. As for the remaining individuals, to be armed of military age and sitting in the presence of an alleged enemy combatant was enough evidence to place them under suspicion as well. Despite having peacefully assembled, posing no threat, the fate of the now tea-drinking men had but all been fulfilled. I could only look on as I sat by and watched through a computer monitor when a sudden, terrifying flurry of Hellfire missiles came crashing down, splattering purple-coloured crystal guts on the side of the Morning Mountain. Since that time, and to this day, I continue to recall several such scenes of graphic violence carried out from the cold comfort of a computer chair. Not a day goes by that I don't question the justification for my actions. By the rules of engagement, it may have been permissible for me to have helped to kill those men whose language I did not speak, customs I did not understand, and crimes I could not identify, in the gruesome manner that I did. Watch them die. But how could it be considered honourable of me to continuously have laid in wait for the next opportunity to kill unsuspecting persons who, more often than not, are possibly no danger to me or any other person at the time? Never mind honourable, how could it be that any thinking person continued to believe that it was necessary for the protection of the United States of America to be in Afghanistan and killing people, not one of whom present was responsible for the September 11th attacks on our nation? Notwithstanding, in 2012, a full year after the demise of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, and by the way, if you listen to Seymour Hersh talk about Osama bin Laden, he says that in the area where Osama bin Laden was holed up in Pakistan, everybody in that area knew exactly where he was, and they knew this for years. So when Obama made out as if they suddenly found out the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden, they sent in the SEAL team to kill him, that is just a lie, because Pakistanis all around that area knew exactly where Osama bin Laden was. So back to this letter. A full year after the demise of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, I was a part of killing misguided young men who were mere children on the day of 9/11. Nevertheless, in spite of my better instincts, I continued to follow orders and obey my command for fear of repercussion, yet all the while becoming increasingly aware the war had very little to do with preventing terror from coming into the United States, and a lot more to do with protecting the profits of weapons manufacturers and so-called defense contractors. The evidence of this fact was laid bare all around me. In the longest, most technologically advanced war in American history, contract mercenaries outnumbered uniform-wearing soldiers 2-to-1 and earned as much as 10 times their salary. Meanwhile, it did not matter whether I was, as I had seen, an Afghan farmer, blown in half, yet miraculously conscious, and pointlessly trying to scoop his insides off the ground, or whether I was an American flag-draped coffin lowered into Arlington National Cemetery to the sound of the 21-gun salute. Isn't that appalling, that poor Afghan farmer, literally trying to scrape his intestines off the ground. I mean, it's unbelievable and just so disgusting and shocking. Bang, bang, bang. Both serve to justify the easy flow of capital at the cost of blood, theirs and ours. When I think about this, I am grief-stricken and ashamed of myself for the things that I've done to support it. So, anyway, Daniel Hale is somebody what we need to spread the word about him, and it is appalling that he goes to prison while all the war criminals are all continuing on, the ones in power, Obama, Trump, Biden, Bush, and Clinton, and all of those, and all the people who assisted them, Cheney, and all those others, Mike Pompeo, all those different secretaries of state like Hillary Clinton, all those people should be in The Hague, basically. And then there's all the criminals in the Israeli government who are funded militarily by the U.S. empire at a tune of $10 million a day. So there are so many war criminals that run around free and are getting accolades, and idiots, useful idiots, are putting them up on a pedestal. But then we have all these whistleblowers who are being punished and being persecuted and hounded, and they have had the courage to speak out and speak up and expose what's going on, what the U.S. empire is doing in various countries all over the world that have not submitted or have puppets that they have helped install, etc. So anyway, I'll read this letter. I'll read excerpts of it. It's a few pages, and I know that it's long, but I think it's important to share this because this is not going to be covered by the corporate media, and it won't be mentioned by the powers that be, including the squad, in quotes, the so-called progressives. They're not going to talk about this either. So if we don't talk about it, then it becomes a sort of a hidden and suffocated truth, which also is the reason it's suffocated in particular, of course, is that these wars, they want them to go on unabated and uninterrupted, and that's why they haven't got a compulsory draft in the US, because they know that that was one of the reasons why the Vietnam War ended, because people's children were going to these wars and coming back maimed or not coming back at all, and there was thousands and thousands of them, and that's one of the reasons they don't have a compulsory draft. They have a poverty draft, and that is why two issues there. Capitalism is basically inextricably linked with imperialism. I say that often. That's from Lenin. Lenin talked about that. And fascism is capitalism in decay. So the poverty draft is a result of end-stage capitalism, and all these imperialist wars are a result of end-stage capitalism, because as Douglas Valentine, the author, said, the CIA is the invisible army of capitalism. Anyway, so I will share these excerpts about Daniel Hale and parts of his letter that he wrote to the judge before he was sentenced recently. And we should probably find out where we can write to Daniel Hale, and don't forget to continue to write to Julian Assange, because there's still the extradition that may happen. The US government is lying to the judges in the UK, and they don't care because they're all in cahoots with one another, it would seem, lying and saying that they won't put him in a maximum security prison, but that is a lie. And also that if they extradited him to Australia, it's absolutely sure that Scott Morrison or somebody else would send Julian Assange to the UK if he was sent to Australia. So you cannot believe what any of these Western governments say. Let's find out where we can write to Daniel Hale, and because he's going to need support, as does Julian Assange. And thanks for watching. Please stay tuned for these excerpts.
The facts regarding Mr. Hale's motive are clear. He committed the offense to bring attention to what he believed to be immoral government conduct committed under the cloak of secrecy and contrary to public statements of then-President Obama regarding the alleged precision of the United States military's drone program.
When it comes to high-value targeting, every mission is to go after one person at a time. But anybody else that's killed in that strike is just blanketly assumed to be an associate of the targeted individual. So as long as they can reasonably identify that all of the people in the field of view of the camera are military-aged males, meaning anybody who's believed to be of age 16 or older, they are a legitimate target under the rules of engagement. If that strike occurs and kills all of them, they just say that they got them all.
Daniel's rationale was that not only was information about drone strikes being denied, but it was also being lied about by people in power. The U.S. was consistently understating the amount of innocent civilians who were targeted and using overbroad targeting lists. So Daniel ended up going to the press, but his case has spanned a long time period. His house was searched in 2014, but he wasn't indicted until 2019. And here we are in 2021 for his sentencing. So this has been an odyssey that has occupied most of the better part of his adult life for basically committing the truth. The U.S. has never contested any of Daniel's disclosures. And when asked to do a statement about what kind of harm Daniel caused, it did not do a damage assessment and did not submit any kind of statement about harm because there wasn't any.
So I met Daniel Hale in 2013. He was beginning his journey in anti-war activism, and I was running a campaign with Code Pink around lethal drone warfare. And it was hard at the time to get people to even believe the stories of survivors from places like Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia. And here we had a veteran who not only believed these stories, but was able to talk about what he had witnessed. Over the years, before Daniel moved to Tennessee, he was a vocal supporter of opposing wars around the world. And when he came back to D.C. To prepare for his sentencing and his trial, Daniel remained committed to opposing injustices. He, while working at different restaurants in D.C., also took to the streets last summer for Black Lives Matter. And the last time that I saw him was actually at the White House, where we showed up to support young Yemeni people that were hunger striking to urge the Biden administration to stop supporting the Saudi blockade on Yemen. So that is Daniel's character, and I know that when he's out, he will remain committed to ending suffering in all forms.
One last thing, I just would like to, in a way, say I'm sorry. I'm not up here for any good reasons. And to the people in the audience who are victims or who are families of victims or have families who live in countries where U.S. militarism and specifically unmanned systems are conducting kinetic strikes. I'm sorry because I'm up here because I was for a short period of time during my military career as an analyst working with unmanned systems deployed to Afghanistan. And at the very least, you all deserve an apology.
Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Hale. I was a veteran of the United States Air Force from 2009 until 2013. Through my experience and my deployment to Afghanistan, where I was primarily tasked with pursuing high-value targets through the utilization of unmanned systems, or otherwise known as drones, I came to learn of the thousands of prisoners who remain at the prison in Bagram Air Force Base to this day, who are in similar situations to those at Guantanamo, who are continually held indefinitely for benign or otherwise petty offenses or reasons not given to them whatsoever.
He is hungry for people to care about the actual story of those people that were not intended targets. He wants people, when they're outraged about what's happening to him as a whistleblower, to care equally about truth tellers that have traveled to the U.S. to demand justice. For people like Nabila, who was playing in a field as a 7-year-old in Pakistan and saw her grandmother blown into pieces. About Abdul Rahman, who was a teenager who was eating dinner with his cousins 2 weeks after his father was assassinated and similarly was killed. About Faisal, who Daniel wrote about in his letter and was a speaker at the drone conference that I organized, who was actually denied an apology by Obama's Department of Justice in exchange for offering to drop his lawsuit against them. I think that's what haunts Daniel, is that those stories are not being centered. And that is the motive that he has explained for his disclosures.
I first want to thank Ban Killer Drones for inviting Black Alliance for Peace to participate in this press conference. I'm very much honored to represent Black Alliance for Peace and to speak on behalf of Daniel Hale. I recall the first time that I heard about Barack Obama's drone kill list. It was no secret exposed by the media. The Obama administration leaked the story to the New York Times as part of their 2012 campaign strategy. It was seen as a boon to his re-election effort, bragging that the president could decide who would live and die based on his whim. He made good on what he thought was good publicity by killing American citizens Anwar al-Awlaki and his son Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki in Yemen via drone strikes. They were not charged with crimes, but no one in Congress or the corporate media pointed out the inherent dangers of this policy. Even Attorney General Eric Holder claimed that constitutional rights to due process were null and void if a president said so. Holder said, due process and judicial process are not one and the same, particularly when it comes to national security. The Constitution grants due process, not judicial process. Daniel, that's nonsense, of course. There's no legal precedent for what he said. Daniel Hale is being punished for doing what the Attorney General and others failed to do: defend legal rights and expose government wrongdoing. And now he awaits sentencing in the Eastern District of Virginia, the notorious hanging court for whistleblowers. We can thank Obama for criminalizing whistleblowing. He prosecuted the previously discredited Espionage Act and used it more often than all of his predecessors combined. Trump continued the policy, and Biden once again proves that there is more continuity than difference among U.S. presidents. And so we are here today on behalf of a whistleblower who's been criminalized for revealing what the state doesn't want us to know. Black Alliance for Peace has a particular interest in the use of drones in Africa, part of the U.S. Africa Command, known as AFRICOM. BAP's signature campaign, no compromise, no retreat, defeat the war against Black African people in the U.S. and abroad, includes among its demands shutting down AFRICOM, 800 plus U.S. and NATO bases around the world. We know there are drone bases in Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Niger. Only a few African nations are not involved in AFRICOM and are therefore under the control of the U.S. military and are not truly sovereign and independent. AFRICOM has increased instability. Of course, that's its goal, to increase the U.S. presence at the expense of other nations' rights. Violence is a feature of the system. It is definitely not a bug. One of the reasons that Daniel Hale publicly denounced drone programs was to expose the wanton killing taking place. Wedding parties, funeral parties, public gatherings of any kind were at risk of drone attack. And anyone who was killed was called a combatant or an insurgent or given some other name, which implied that the person lost the right to live if killed by the U.S. Hale is paying a big price because he wanted the world to know what the U.S. does. But let's not be confused about the prosecution. Anyone going before the Eastern District pleads guilty. And that's the only wise legal recourse, because whistleblowers have no legal rights. No defense is allowed. Not First Amendment rights, not wanting to inform the public. Juries are not even allowed to hear these words. I remember growing up hearing about show trials in the Soviet Union. And here we are in the United States with exactly the same thing, hoping that Hale is sentenced to a mere 10 years. In exposing the drones, Hale did not just expose military policy, but the concept of American exceptionalism, the idea that the U.S. can invade, sanction, or use proxies in order to supposedly benefit people around the world. He proved that these notions are nonsensical lies. Drone programs are just one facet of U.S. foreign policy. and are used to silence anyone who thinks about revealing the inner workings of the government. Cruelty is the point. If the dissenters are not punished, the whole system might be at risk. Whether he realized it or not, Hale exposed why the military budget must be cut in half. That is another BAP demand. The $750 billion budget is 60% of all discretionary spending, and therefore deprives people in this country of their right to live with their needs met. I recall being in Washington and seeing advertisements in their metro for Raytheon and McDonnell Douglas. The welfare system for the military-industrial complex requires persecution and prosecution. Its existence is at risk if whistleblowers are not given the most draconian punishments possible. That's why we bear witness for Daniel Hale and speak up for him, because he cannot speak up for himself. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.